This car's been running for no more than like 5 minutes, and that's my hand. That's my hand to the actual oil leak already. That's how bad it is. That's better. I can hear again. You saw how bad that oil leak was. 353,000 miles on this car, 16 plate Mondeo 2 litre diesel. I've covered in the past oil leaks on these cars, which come from, there's a cog unit behind the actual high pressure fuel pump. That is the main oil leak on these. This oil leak is a whole new ball game. This is coming from somewhere else. Now, from what you've just seen on that video, it would appear to anybody that the rear main oil seal is literally pissing out oil. I've already done a couple of these, and that's what I believed, rear main oil seal. So you take the gearbox out, take the flywheel off, and then I look at the rear main oil seal and I think to myself, the amount of oil that's been leaking, that oil seal looks pretty nice. It doesn't look like it's been leaking. That's when you start to think to yourself, if I put a new rear main oil seal in this car, is it going to cure it? And the answer's no. I could be wrong though. This car may well be the rear main oil seal, but I've got a suspicion, a strong suspicion it's not the rear main oil seal, and I'm going to show you exactly where it's leaking from. Bear in mind, this is a very high mileage car. It's 353,000 miles, and this particular type of leak I'm only getting on the high mileage cars, the real high mileage ones like this. So don't have nightmares. But there again, there are quite a lot of these out there. They'll probably use these Mondeos as taxis, so you soon rack the miles up. By the way, this car had a new timing chain and tensioner about 100,000 miles ago. So, and the engine does sound okay, it sounds sweet. So the only big problem with it is this oil leak. The only other thing is, I'm not, well, how can I put it? I can actually change this part I'm going to change in the car. I can take the gearbox out and sump off and everything else in the car and do the job in the car, but I'm not going to. I've got a good engine here, which I can swap straight into this car quickly and easily, get rid of the car. Then I'm going to have the engine out of this car, sat on the bench, so I can then tackle this oil leak, and it will give me more time to actually go through it properly rather than trying to rush it in the car. And believe me, it's a lot of aggravation doing this oil leak in the car, as I've already found out. It's not a very nice job at all. So what I'll do is, I'll get this engine out now, get this engine swapped, get rid of the car, then I'll have the engine sat here in front of me, and I'll take it apart and I'll explain to you what's actually leaking. That's if I'm correct. Anyway, let's get on. It's now a day later. I've just put the engine in this car, so this car can actually go now. But where it was all dripping oil from there, it's all nice and clean now. Woohoo! So that's the actual car done. And here is our oil leaking engine, which what I'm going to do when I get the engine hoist, I don't know if I can even get around there. The first thing I'm going to do is get the clutch and flywheel off, and we'll have a look at the rear main to start with. The two halves of this flywheel have kind of twisted, so the bolts are covered, so I've had to use a screwdriver to try and twist the bloody flywheel round so I can get to the bloody bolts. Just as I suspected, this rear main oil seal is absolutely bone dry. No sign of any oil leakage from it whatsoever. But this is where I believe it's coming from. You see this rear main end cap? Just here, there's like a little seal, a little rubber seal that runs down the edges. You put the seals into this end cap, then you slide the end cap onto the actual block, then bolt it up. Then you push the rear main oil seal in. And what I believe is the little seals here, where they meet the sump here, or this extension piece, they've shrunk. And just in that corner bit, just there, that's where it's leaking. And you can see it's all soaking wet with oil here. And I reckon the oil's pumping itself out of this little hole here, where that seal was shrunk. And it's running along and coming on these bolts and dripping down. And it's exactly the same here, this side. Soaking wet with oil, just at this little corner bit. So I guess the only way we're going to know for sure is to actually take this end cap off, and this is where the fun and games begin, because you can't just unbolt this end cap. You need to take the sump off. Then also there's an extension piece that the oil pump bolts onto. This big aluminium section has got to come off as well. Before I rip this sump off, I'm going to take the alternator, the tensioner and the air conditioning compressor off. Reason being, the bracket that holds all these units on, it kind of dogs into that sandwich plate just above the sump, and you can't get that sandwich plate off without taking that huge bracket out of the way. Right, so I'm going to pin the old auxiliary belt up, and that can come off. Obviously you will have to drain the air conditioning gas out and remove the two 10mm and the pipes off the compressor, plus the wiring. And there's three 13mm bolts holding this compressor on. Alternator's pretty straightforward. One 13mm nut for your main live terminal and one plug connector. And two 13mm bolts holding it on. You know, I had the engine on the flipping floor because I had to lend the engine crane out down the other garage. Now I've got the crane back, I can lift it up and work at a more comfortable height. Right. By the way, if this engine were in the car, you would have to remove the fuel filter housing in order to get the alternator out. But anyway, as this is out of the car, I ain't got to touch the fuel filter housing. But there are two 5mm Allen headed bolts that hold a vacuum solenoid on, which need to come out, and six 13mm bolts which are holding this entire bracket in place. That should just slot out now. Right about now seems a good time to drop the oil out. Yuck! There's around about 20 8mm bolts holding this sump on, and I believe all these bolts, they're like captive in the actual sump casing, so they won't come straight out, which is a good thing. So I'm just going to whiz all these out of the air gun. The sump will be stuck onto the block sort of thing, but you can get a little screwdriver and just pry it loose. It's not actually that tight. That's all, see, that's coming off now. We're getting there. We're going to remove this sandwich plate now. There is a whole load of 6mm Allen key bolts that we've got to undo. There's like 4 at the back. In fact, there's loads all the way around. There's even some of them bolts inside the sump, just up there. So you have to go around it carefully and make sure you unbolt them all. But before we actually unbolt them, there is a oil level sensor plug you've got to disconnect, and also there's a 10mm there which holds your dipstick onto that plate. That has to come out as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to try and leave the dipstick hanging while we slide the plate off. And one last thing, when you undo these Allen key bolts, I don't advise using like an air tool to whip them out straight away. I'd probably loosen them by hand and make sure they're actually coming out, because some of them can be pretty tight and you don't want to snap any. So be warned. Last bolt. So all our bolts are out. Now, because this whole thing has been stuck on with gasket sealant, let's see how tight it is. Oh, we've got a bit of movement. It's coming. It's nearly off. Well, there we go. Now we can see the oil pump. And that chain, there's no tensioner on that chain whatsoever. It's just a loose chain, just spins the pump from the crankshaft. But what we're going to do, that oil pump is attached to like a great big metal plate which runs all the way around the back, and it's got to come off anyway, because that plate is actually covering up the 2 bolts on our end cap that we want to get off. So there's 4 bolts, 4 10mm running down either side of this plate. So I'm going to undo all 4, and then I'm just going to lift this plate off complete with the oil pump. and then I'll just slide the chain off as I take it off, and I'll do the same when I put it back. Okay, last bolt coming out. Let's see if it comes off. Yep, that's it. I'll just take that chain off and it will piss oil all over the floor at the same time. There we go. 1 oil pump. This is the important bit. I'm going to undo these end cap bolts. They're 2 18mm. I should imagine they're pretty goddamn tight, so I've got handy to hold the engine steady. God almighty, it's moved. That's one. Let's see if I can get this one moving. Yeah! Freaking hell! That's it. We're loose. Cheers, Andy. This is where we get to see if the seals are completely knackered. That's that. And then this end cap should just come straight down. Bingo. Right, there's a few things going on here. Number one, the seal that runs down this end cap, it's shrunk. You can see it's shrunk by a good millimetre there. There's actually, where that sandwich plate bolts onto this end cap, there's no gasket sealant here either. But that seal should be out here, squashed up firmly against the sandwich plate, if you know what I mean. And obviously there should be sealer around here as well to help it, but there isn't any. So because the main problem, because that seal shrunk, the oil from the engine is coming straight past here and coming out just here where the pin head of my pick is. So and it should be the same the other side. If I turn that around to about there, you can see that this seal has shrunk as well. If I get a bit of more light on it. Yeah, I don't know, it's a bit difficult to see, but that one there has definitely shrunk by I don't know, a good millimetre as well. And once again, the oil was just allowed to come from in the engine past that seal and straight out, dripping down, well, between the engine and gearbox really. And just to show on this sandwich plate, where them seals would meet from that end cap would be around about here. And you see there's actually there's some gasket sealant there, but you can imagine if that seal is, if it's not sealing here, the engine oil is able to come across here and straight out and drip down onto these bolts and then drip down. So I think there's a few things here, but it's a combination of a lot of mileage. Them seals have shrunk. The gasket sealer no doubt has shrunk as well, and it's practically non-existent, because I would have had a bit more, I'd have expected a bit more gasket sealing all the way across here, but there isn't. And even if I go over to the engine, to where that plate bolts up, there really isn't much in the way of gasket sealant here. So I'm kind of thinking them seals are quite important, and now that they've shrunk, because there's next to nothing in the way of gasket sealant around this area, the oil was just flowing from the engine straight past them seals. Anyway, I have a pack of new seals here, so that's what they look like. I shall pop these on the end cap and then stick it back in. The changing these seals are pretty straightforward. They literally just pull off. There's a little like dowel there, so you give them a bit of a clean up. And the new seal just slides over the dowel, and then you just push it into place. Before I refit this end cap, I've cleaned up the surfaces where this seal sits at the top, where it hooks over the peg. I'm just going to put a little bit of instant gasket just around that top peg, just to make sure. And you can either use silicone spray or silicone grease, but when you slide this end cap back into place, you'll find it's very difficult to slide it up there because of these seals. So you actually smear this silicone grease all over that seal, and that will help it immensely in going back into position. So I'll do the same to the other side. Get the old grease out. So if you haven't got the silicone grease, you can use like a silicone spray. But just out of interest, after 350 something thousand miles, look how clean that main bearing shell is. It's not even worn, it's as clean as a bloody whistle, like the day it was brand new. So now you've just got to be very gentle and very carefully slide that end cap back up into place. There we go, bingo. And just so you know, when you're tightening the main bearing caps back up, the bolts, you are supposed to renew the bolts. And it's 30 Newton meters and then 82 degrees. Oh, the engine's swaying about a little bit, but you'll notice that now that end cap's fitted, the extra length for these seals is hanging out. You obviously can't leave them that flipping long. So what you need is a very sharp razor blade or something, and I'm going to trim these off, but I'm going to leave about a millimetre sticking out from this end cap. So when I put this sandwich piece on here, it will squash it in, and if it does shrink a bit, it's going to be under like a bit of tension anyway, so it's going to take a long time to shrink back inside the end cap from where the old one was. So with my razor blade, I shall get that in position, so I'm leaving about a millimetre, and just snip that off like that, and that's about perfect. And I shall do exactly the same for the other side. There we go. So you see I've got a good millimetre of that seal sticking out from that end cap here. And obviously when I put this sandwich plate back on, I'll put a bead of sealer all the way around, so there's no way any oil can leak from inside that engine outwards. Okay, these remain oil seals, they're not very nice, but they come with a fitting applicator which will literally slot over the end of the crankshaft like so, and then you can slide the seal on and tap it round and put it in basically. But the problem is the new seal, you see the bit that actually seals, the little bronzy part, it's flat. So what you have to do is take this applicator, put it in the middle of that seal like that, and you literally have to push that applicator through the seal, and which will squash it inwards. So in actual fact I found it easy to put the applicator on the bench, and now I can push it through this way. It's pretty tight to actually get it on. Yeah. It's going. That's on. There we go. Nasty. And you can see how the seal has been pushed in now onto the applicator. Now just slot the applicator onto the end of the crankshaft, and you can literally push the seal on so far with your fingers, just press it in. But before I take that applicator out of the way, I'm going to use a little punch and tap it all the way around, so I know that the seal is perfectly in first. All I'm really doing is getting the outer seal completely flush with the actual engine block and the end cap, and when the note changes, you know you've actually got there. Like half the socket is on the actual seal and half is on the actual engine block. And now this applicator should just pull out. Whoa! Yeah. What a piece of shit. What an absolute turd of a job. It's a good thing these oil leaks aren't happening on a regular basis. They only tend to be happening on the ones that are doing like over 300,000 miles, thank God. But yeah, it's a lot of work. Even in the car, it's a nightmare, because you've literally got to have a bar holding the engine while the gearbox is out from the top, so you can get the alternator and the air conditioning compressor off and all that crap out of the way, because you can't have a stand under the sump. Obviously you've got to take the sump off. But anyway, I just wanted to show that oil leak because I've had a few of them now, so I thought it was worth noting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get that sandwich plate, clean it all up, put a bead of instant gasket around it, pop that back on and put the rest of it back together. I will fit a new sump gasket on it as well. They're about £45 from Ford, unless you can get them second, like from motor parts, I don't know. But yeah, Peugeot engines, what can I say? Oil leaks come as standard, I reckon. But that's it. That's all I was going to show. But you can see how them end cap seals go now. Just make sure when you cut them off, you leave at least a millimetre, so that when you put that sandwich plate on, they'll squash up. And so there's no chance of them shrinking up inside that end cap anytime soon. So that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. See ya.